Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cozy Talks Live. For those of you watching the replay, welcome, and please put replay into the comments section and any questions that you may have. I do go back after the show is over to pick up any of those questions. But in the meantime, for those of you who are live, let's start seeing who's on board this evening. We've got Emily coming on board from Central PA with Starbucks in her hand. Ooh, she's getting fancy tonight. We got Scott coming in from West Virginia and his cold water. So proud of all the progress that you've made, Scott. And thank you again for keeping me updated on everything. We've got our Canuck there. We got Janie coming in from Ontario, Canada. Trisha coming in from Iowa. Chuck having a beautiful evening in Wyoming with his iced tea. And there's my other Canadian right there. There's Tom right there listening in from Facebook. So guys, I am live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Instagram. So any number of places that you can find me, all under the title Cozy Talks. Pretty easy there. We got Sean coming in from Jacksonville, sipping his Mountain Dew Baja Cabo Citrus Zero. They can fit all of that name in one can of soda. That's amazing. Hey, Pastor David, it's a party, man. All right, guys, we are ready for this evening. I got to tell you, I feel like a sprayed cockroach after April. Like Limb Loss Awareness Month, it was like insane. We had 3 sponsored shows, which was in and of itself pretty big. I tried going live every night, and I did it ended up being like an average of every other night. Lots of activities. I taught my 13-hour 2-day CEU course over in Jacksonville. So it was a crazy month. So I am looking forward to just not slowing down, because I just don't know how to slow down, but taking it a little bit easier and having just general Q&A sessions with you guys, which I love to do just as much as I love the sponsored shows. And we've got a lot of questions that came in for tonight. I'm really excited to get started on those. We've got Linda coming in from New York with her cold water. Let's see. And we got Jerry Ann with her French vanilla coffee from Arizona. Tom coming in from Maryland. Stephen from Michigan drinking squirt. Mary Ann with ice water and an Indian taco. What's an Indian taco, Mary Ann? What is that? I have never heard of an Indian taco. Please explain this to me. We got Earl coming in from California. And let's see, on the Instagram channel, we got a few people jumping on board. We got Tom as well there. We got Shane coming in. Legs Are Us. We got someone by the name of TW Hershey, and ID Hand Therapy is on board. So guys, on my Instagram channel, would love to know. Legs Are Us is saying it's Cozy Awareness Month. Actually, May is my birthday month, and it's also the month I celebrate my anniversary for being cancer-free. So, May is my month. It's one of my favorite months right there. There we go. All right, we got Comadre coming in from Miami. I know, right, Sean? I'm like, please explain. What is an Indian taco? We got Denise. There's my Tar Heel lady right there with her water and more water, because apparently it's very hot over there in North Carolina. It is heating up here as well. We got Larry coming in with iced tea unsweetened from Illinois. All right, guys. So like I said, we've got a lot of questions. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to be switching forth on my screens. Okay. Ooh, here was a good one that came in. And I always love to give a shout out to my colleagues who are doing amazing things. So the question that came in was, are there any materials or resources out there for kids in terms of speaking about amputations and education and awareness? So my favorite is The Adventures of Roxy Rue. So one of my colleagues, Hillary Sussman, she's a physical therapist. She wrote these books about the character Roxy Rue. And Roxy Rue is this beautiful little dog, an amputee pup. So she has 2 books. I have to actually catch up with Hillary. I haven't caught up with her in a while. So who knows? She may have published a 3rd book by now, knowing her. And she goes around to children's schools and different communities and helping educate the kids on amputee awareness. And she does so through these 2 beautiful books. And then also, this is my favorite thing ever. Look at that. We've got Roxy Rue right here, the sweetest little stuffed animal. And it's like missing her little leg. And she even has, like, I think Hillary has one where it has like a little toy prosthetic leg. It's very, very sweet. So Roxy likes to hang out here with Bob. And sometimes Fred gets a little bit jealous, but we're all right. Guys, if you want to find books like that, her handle is Adventures with Roxy Rue. And if you just put that into your search engine in Facebook, or in Instagram, you will find her. I know, sorry, Jerry Ann, like I have like a really fancy camera that my team gave me. And the cool thing is it's constantly focusing, but if I do just a little too many movements, like the camera just can't keep up. So I just need to stay put, that's not easy for me to do, especially when I'm talking with my hands all the time. So Mary Ann, the The Mystery of the Indian Taco. She says it's delicious. It's fried bread with all the good taco stuff. Maybe it's a South Dakota thing, but so good. I have never heard of that. Curious minds want to know more, Marianne. What kind of bread are you using there for that? Emily says, I've talked about writing a kid's book about my amputation. So guys, this is actually one of my favorite questions to ask folks. Hey, we got trauma translator on board right there. When you guys are approached in public by kids, and we've talked about this before, like, obviously we have some adults in public that are a little less gracious than others about making inquiries about your disability. But when you have a child in public, a curious child, or even members of your own family that are children, how did you explain your amputation? I always love asking this because I hear some of the most thoughtful responses and then also some of the most humorous responses. I think one of my favorite ones was, I didn't eat my vegetables and that's why I lost my leg. So make sure you eat your vegetables. I think that was one of my favorite ones so far. Ooh, door slamming. All right, Emily. Okay, so yeah, we got that. So guys, I'm going to wait for a minute for you guys to put your answers in because I really kind of want to know. And in the meantime, I'm going to look at another one of the questions that we have. So our headliner question for this evening came from Charlie, and Charlie is from New York asking, should I leave Tegaderm on a blister for just a day, 2 days, or until it goes away? Okay, so Tegaderm, I wish I had a sample of it. It's like a thin, I don't want to call it plastic. It looks like saran wrap, honestly. It's very thin. It's very pliable, and it comes like on almost like on a little sticker sheet, and you peel it off, right? And I believe you can get it over the counter at a Walgreens or a pharmacy store. So whenever I have someone who has a blister and they are a very active person, and the blister is not too bad, I might allow them to put Tegaderm over the blister and continue to wear their socket as we wait for the blister to heal. Lots of caveats to that. Obviously, if the socket is causing the reason for the blister and it still hasn't been resolved, the issue that caused the blister has not been resolved, then we don't wear the socket, okay? But if it's somebody who's really active, they know they have a blister, it just needs a chance to heal. They know why they got the blister. We might use a little Tegaderm because it provides a nice little barrier there and it prevents friction from happening, okay? And then also with my folks who have very sensitive skin, and perhaps their blister has healed, but it's still brand new skin right there, we might put a little patch of Tegaderm until that skin gets accustomed to wearing the socket full time again, okay? So in terms of like, when do you take it off? When do you leave it on? Tegaderm is meant to stay on, like it's meant to be a little barrier there, and you can leave it on for several days. The rule of thumb is, look at what's going on. If the blister is getting kind of yucky looking, then you need to take it off and you need to clean it. If the blister looks clean and underneath the Tegaderm, it looks clean, then you can safely leave it on for a few days, okay? And again, it's about knowing your skin. And the first couple of times that you do that, it's good to have someone laying eyes on you, whether you're a prosthetist or your physical therapist, to make sure that nothing is getting infected. Larry says, I told my neighbor's kids I lost it from a shark attack. I was the show and tell person for kindergarten last fall. Oh, geez. We're creating a whole new generation of Jaws. Chuck told the little boy he had a motorcycle wreck and his leg got really sick and they cut it off so he could live and sent his leg to heaven. I like that explanation very much. I like that one. We got Coach Mac on board. Man, I feel honored, man. Welcome aboard, Coach Mac. We've got Pam also on board through our Instagram channel. So guys, welcome aboard. If you have any questions regarding amputation, please don't be shy. Put them up on there. All right, let's go on to our next question. Oh, this was a good one. This one came in through my texting service, and it says, how is it best to align the prosthetic foot? Should it point straight ahead or towards the outside or towards the inside? It may be personal, but I find it all seems to work better for me with my foot pointing straight ahead. And then there's other parts to this question. And actually, guys, let me see if I can find I should have brought this out ahead of time. It's like I came back from a trip and where is my prosthetic foot? And of course, it is nowhere to be found. Naturally, when I need it, it's nowhere to be found. And the rest of the day, it gets in my way. Okay. So basically, when you have your prosthetic foot, okay, it can be, ooh, I do have a visual for this one. Look at that. Okay. So as you guys can see, you're looking kind of like from the aerial view down on the foot. Okay. And a lot of manufacturers will tell the prosthetist to set the foot in 5 degrees of external rotation, meaning the toes are going to point outwards. Okay. So the toes are going to point out 5 degrees. There's a reason for this. Okay. A lot of our prosthetic feet are obviously trying to mimic the human foot. And when you put your heel down, right, the weight translates from the heel of your foot through the outside and then through the inside and then out through your toe when you push off through your toes, right? So there's like a little line that travels through the foot as you roll over your foot. And a lot of these prosthetic feet are trying to mimic that same progression, the same change of your weight pattern. Okay. So that's why they might set it out at 5 degrees so that the mechanics of the foot can mimic the mechanics of your sound and anatomical foot. Okay. Does it have to always be that way? No. Usually when I get a patient who's new to wearing a prosthesis, I'll look at the feet and I'll see, okay, this one was set at 5 degrees external rotation, or maybe the prosthetist set it a little more aggressively out, more toes out, or perhaps even toes in. And maybe that's to try to match it up with the sound foot. So usually I'll just work with the patient for a little bit of time, maybe the first 1 or 2 sessions, and we'll see, just based on what I'm seeing with the patient, I'll be able to tell like, yes, this in fact is a good alignment versus we need to return it. So there's a couple of scenarios. The 5 degrees external rotation, which is the manufacturer's typically the manufacturer's guidelines. Okay. If the prosthetist is trying to give the person more support because they're very unstable, then they might set the foot in more external rotation, right? To give them a wider base of support. So the toe might be facing out. Okay. Very rare to find a prosthetist that sets the foot with the toes in. In fact, I really can't think of in recent memory I have for that is if perhaps the sound foot, the anatomical foot, is also toes in, and maybe they're trying to mimic the person's anatomical alignment, but it may not. It's gonna affect the mechanics of the foot and how it works. Okay, let's see. Larry says, I had to fess up, but I used it as a teachable moment, talking about what really happened and let them see why I felt uncomfortable telling Noah what had happened, and let them look at my leg, watch as I took my leg on and off. Yeah. Robert says, mine started at 5 degrees of rotation, external rotation, but then Miss Malone adjusted it to match my other foot because I walk better. Yeah. So it's a kind of a balance between putting the foot at an optimal alignment so that you can really utilize the benefits of the way the foot was designed to work, right? And then making sure it plays nicely with your sound foot. And yeah, there's times where you might see a person with a difference, like person walking with a prosthesis and their anatomical foot might be straight ahead and their prosthetic foot might be externally rotated a little bit. And that might actually be their normal alignment. Again, I've learned, don't judge on the first visit. When I see a patient, I just sit back and I watch, and then I'll call the prosthetist and I'll be like, hey, I noticed this discrepancy about their alignment. What was your reasoning behind this? Okay. And that usually gives me some insight right there. Hey, Marty from Texas. We got my Texan on board with a glass of iced tea and a little late. That's all right. Making an entrance. All right. And this is a 2-part question that this person sent in. Then they said, can the foot prosthesis have too much flexibility? And are there prosthetic feet that are made for specific activities? It's almost like he wants to feed me questions so that I can post my cheat sheets. So yes, there is such a thing as a foot being too flexible, and not because the foot itself is too flexible. It's mainly because the person is using the wrong kind of prosthetic foot, and it may be too flexible for them. Okay. So for example, if somebody wants to use a dynamic response foot or an energy storing and response foot, something that gives you a lot of zip and a lot of zing, somebody who needs more stability might find that foot to be a little too flexible, right? They might describe it as feeling too flexible. Okay. And they need a foot that gives them more stability, perhaps a little more stiffness, right? And again, it could also be weight classification. Sometimes if, a lot of our feet are classified by weight. So if you're somebody who's like maybe on the line between 2 weight categories, right? and they give you a foot that is too light for you, you might find that it's just a little too springy and a little too flexible, and you might need a stiffer foot feel. Okay. And yes, different feet are meant for different activities. Okay. So we'll give you guys the quick recap, and then I'm going to post my QR code right here. This one right here. All right. Let me bring that down so you guys can I bring it down? No. Let's put it over there. Okay. All right. So guys, that QR code is to my cheat sheet, and I'm going to explain what's in that cheat sheet in just a moment. So basically, there's 10 different classifications of prosthetic feet. Most of those are what prosthetists see feet as, and it's also how I classify feet. Okay. And we classify feet by their function, meaning how they were designed and what they were designed to do. There are some feet that are meant to be more stable, some feet that are meant to be more flexible and mobile, some feet that are meant to better connect you into the ground, right? And we talked a lot about those, and those are the hydraulic feet that we talked about last week on last week's shows, okay? So when it comes to differentiating between these feet, I always tell people, don't get thrown off by the names, because unfortunately, these great names that the companies come up with, they don't tell you a lot about the foot itself, right? You got to kind of go digging in there. But if you understand the classification system, right, how a foot is classified, then you'll know how it's supposed to work and whether it's meant for you or not. Okay. So guys, I have 2 blogs written about this on my website. I just posted it right there, and there's a blog tab. What I did for here with this particular QR code is I took all of College Park's feet. Okay, I sat down with John Cook. He's one of their phenomenal prosthetists, and he and I sat down one day, and I said, "Okay, John, let's classify all of these feet. Tell me how these feet work." Okay, so that's what you get there with that cheat sheet right there. I'm pointing in the right direction right there. So guys, I want to see you guys scanning this. Those of you who participated in the reel today, I did post this to my Instagram and Facebook reel. So if you commented and participated in that particular post, your name is going to be entered for the raffle giveaway, and we're going to have College Park pick out a winner for me tomorrow. Okay, so you can still do it. Okay, but basically, when you scan this, you get a reference sheet. Print it out and hang on to it. And that way, next time you are up for getting a new foot, okay, you know the classifications that College Park falls into. Okay, so you'll know if you are a candidate for a hydraulic foot, you'll look at this little QR code cheat sheet right here, and under hydraulics, you're going to see the Odyssey K2, K3, and the Odyssey the Odyssey microprocessor foot listed under there. Does that make sense, guys? How many of you guys in the comment section, please let me know. How many of you guys already took a look at this cheat sheet and downloaded it? From those of you who participated in the post today, tell me if you did it or not. Hey, there's Mary coming in from, oh no, the Accidental Pirate coming in from Langley, British Columbia, Canada. Welcome. Coach Max says, better to provide the short-term support for balance or set the foot at the optimal angle to allow for strengthening, adaptation, and growth. Absolutely right, Coach Mac. Right on the nose right there. We got POA Charleston on board, so welcome as well. Welcome, Timothy, as well. Okay, so yes, and that's exactly that. And one of the things that when I was covering prosthetics and alignment in my lecture with physical therapists a couple of weeks ago, I explained alignment is an evolutionary process. And we also covered that, guys, on the show a couple of weeks back in April when we talked about alignment with osseointegration, right? That your alignment does not stay the same. Why? Because as you start to use your prosthesis, especially if you're working with a physical therapist, you're going to get stronger. You're going to have more range of motion available to you. Right? So your alignment should be changing. It should require adjustments. Okay. And what Coach Max just said it right there, you might align the person to be more stable in the beginning as they're getting their sea legs back with using the prosthesis. And then as the person gets better, then perhaps they can come with the alignment. So it's twofold. It's obviously the stability of the individual, and then also keeping in mind the engineering and the physics of the actual prosthetic foot. Okay, guys, especially some of our more modern feet. And I was racking my computer trying to find this wonderful picture that Oser loaned me. That was some of these more advanced feet. If you do not set the foot in 5 degrees of rotation, the weight of the body is not going to go through the prosthetic toes. Okay. And as you're walking, guys, think about it. When you're walking, your heel goes down, you go through your midfoot, and then you push off the toes. Okay, so if that foot is not aligned properly, you might not get that push off the toes. Okay. And I'm sure Coach Mack has seen that happen also with his running amputees, that if that running blade is not aligned properly, if that is not on a posterior mount for your below the knee amputees, you're not going to be getting the most efficiency out of something like the running blade or even an energy storing foot. Does that make sense, guys? All right. So we've got Emily says that she commented on the post. Janie says yes. Linda says yes. Robert says yes. Good. David says not yet. What? Pastor David, how come? You need to go do that. Trisha says that she did. Marty says yes. Let's see. Emily says, I have it, but I haven't looked at it. Busy day. Earl says, I got the sheet from the original show. And Scott says I did. And guys, it's meant to be a reference sheet. And again, guys, I'm like throwing everything at the kitchen sink at you guys. It's a reference sheet. So that for those of you, again, when you're just like, okay, I'm up for a new foot, where do I start? And guys, I love College Park. I love their feet. I love their team. I love their customer service. I love their products. But I am the first one to say, and they support me on this, that it's not for everybody, right? We have hundreds of prosthetic feet out there on the market from several different manufacturers. So when I'm presenting you with this cheat sheet for the College Park feet, it's basically kind of to give you a starting point. Okay. So for example, if you and your prosthetist determine that you are a candidate for a multi-axial foot, okay, then you get a multi-axial foot from College Park maybe, and try a multi-axial foot from Oser or Ottobock or Proteer, okay? And at least now with the College Park cheat sheet, you can say, okay, this is what they have for multi-axial feet, and you can start there. It's a starting point. Yeah. Pam says, yes, I did. I'm so glad. David's like, I will. Hey there, Mark. Hola, Mark. Good to see you, man. Okay. Let's see, we got all sorts of people. Rob joining on board as well in our Instagram channel. Excellent. Okay, so does that make sense, guys? Okay, so now I have another quick COSI poll for you guys. Guys, by the way, why am I not seeing more people scan? You guys know that I can tell if you're scanning the QR codes or not. I need to see people scanning this. I worked hard to put it together. All right, COSI poll. Do you guys want more of these downloadables? Like these, I call them cheat sheets because that's what when I was growing up, my mom was helping me study for things, and she would help me write down details that I would forget so I could just carry it around with me and study it throughout the day. Would it be beneficial to you guys for me to create more of these cheat sheets on various topics? So Pam, if you look at the QR code, right, I'm pointing to it right there. Right there. If you click on the QR code, and then you know what, guys, I realize there might be some of you who are not able to do the QR code click. And I just happen to have, I have the link here. Okay. Looky. Ta-da! There it is, guys. Okay. So I got the QR code there, and I also posted the link there to the cheat sheet. Okay. So Pam, you can get it right there. It's right below. I just posted it right there. There it is. Look at that. All right, guys, let's move on to the next question that we have for this evening. Robert says, yes, they're very helpful when I get asked questions. Janie says, yes. Marty says, yes. Tom says, yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Okay, now here's the second part of the COSI poll. What do you want me to write cheat sheets on? Like, what subject matter do you want me to do it on? I haven't done one on prosthetic knees, and I'm wondering if that might be helpful. So while you guys are putting that in the comment section, I'm going to answer the next question. All right. Just so we have right here. Bill says, I would like to know, what foot does College Park recommend for very active peeps who are traversing on uneven ground? I do some excavation work with uneven loose soil, really wears me out. Another question, is there a specific foot that works better with elevated vacuum? How durable is it? I play in the dirt a lot. I'm landscaping and hardscaping my 2.5-acre homestead. So guys, I love this because Bill has given me a lot of information on his activity level, his lifestyle, what his lifestyle and daily demands are on his body, and what it is that he would like to do. So when I hear traversing uneven ground and active, I think of hydraulic foot. Automatically comes to my brain. And not just because it was the topic of our conversation on last week's show. Okay. But basically, one of the benefits of a hydraulic foot is that it really connects you with the ground because it's got that hydraulic fluid in there controlling the dorsiflexion and plantar flexion of the foot, the up and down movement of that ankle and foot joint. Okay. So it's going to give you a much more connected feeling and a softer, smoother transition through the movements. Okay. So folks with uneven terrain, great option. It's also a good option for people who need some stability there too, okay, because they're being more connected to the ground. Now, for being as active as you are, Bill, and playing around in the dirt, I don't know if a microprocessor unit would be appropriate, just because, again, you're talking about having an iPhone on your foot. So that going through the dirt and the mud and a lot of abuse and high impact might not be the best solution. That being said, College Park does. They have a K3 Odyssey foot. Okay. And if I remember correctly from what Elisa, the prosthetist, said last week, she said one of the differences between the K2 and the K3 Odyssey foot is that the K3 foot allows also for more movement. So it's almost like a little bit of multi-axial, little energy storing response. So it's got for more active people like yourself. Okay. So Bill, I would recommend try a hydraulic foot. Start with the Odyssey from College Park. They have a 30-day trial. And then talk to your prosthetist about other hydraulic feet on the market and then compare the two and just see which one feels better. Chuck says, thank you for the link. Finally got the sheet. Yes, please make more about knees. Okay. Pastor David said he just printed it out. All right. That was quick. That was quick. All right. Mark says he wants one on balance. Marty says cheat sheet on everything. Hey, Glenn, glad to see you here. Okay. All right. So does that make sense? So again, I would say hydraulic feet for your uneven terrain, especially if you're out in the 2.5 acres homestead that you're working on, for sure. All right, let's see what else is going on. Accidental Pirate says, absolutely, cheat sheets are great. Good, glad to hear. Okay, so I will start working on some. Marty says, type of food for OR nurse. Huh? Walking in pasture with my mini cows and possibly riding horses. Don't tell my wife. Marty, I'm not sure if that's a comment or a question, but if you want to clarify that one for me, it sounds very interesting. All right, we got Trisha here asking, I have a question. Is there somewhere you can either donate or sell feet and a microprocessor knee? Yes. So there's two places that I recommend, folks. One is called Penta, P-E-N-T-A. Oh, good heavens. And of course, right now I am blanking out. I don't know if they call themselves Penta Recycling. The other one would be the Range of Motion Project. Okay. Now, guys, I am more familiar with the Range of Motion Project. They have a clinic in Ecuador and a clinic in Guatemala. And I've been to the Guatemala clinic twice to work out of their amputee outreach clinic. And they are always looking for extra parts. However, if you have a microprocessor knee, I think someone in the US would be able to utilize that more efficiently. Reason being is in Guatemala and in Ecuador, a lot of their patients will travel in from very, very far away, like sometimes as many as 12 hours to get to the clinic. So when it comes to a microprocessor knee, it may not be able to withstand the wear and tear of the streets, the country, and then not being able to get to the prosthetist on a regular basis for maintenance or for programming. So my recommendation would be, if you guys Google, if somebody wants to do that for me right now, that'd be awesome. If you can right click and Google Penta Recycling, Penta Prosthetic Foot Recycling. And that way we can get the entire name of that company. I've received several emails from them. So I know that they are based in the United States. I have a couple of folks in the community that have worked with them and have said wonderful things about this particular organization and how they utilize the prosthetic parts. And I believe they include students in so that they can learn as well. So again, go ahead and if somebody can Google that for me, that would be wonderful. Yes, I love romp. So Sean Brown says, cheat sheet for types of feet and sockets for flexibility for very active people. Now, Sean, you go to my website. Okay, let me. All right, Sean, if you go to my website, cositalks.com, and you go to the blog section, okay, the blog that's titled Everything You Need to Know About Prosthetic Feet, that explains all the classifications of the prosthetic feet. And then I have a cheat sheet for that one, and it's in the blog. Okay. So you can find that one there, right there. And then the sockets. Yeah, I can probably do one for sockets too. Earl says range of motion for sure. That's where my first foot and knee went. Yeah, that's a great place. It's a shame for me. I think it's kind of like a waste that we cannot recycle prosthetic componentry and that we can't figure out a way to do it responsibly, because obviously the used prosthetic part because of liability and this and that and the other. And it's just like, can we just figure out a way to refurbish a prosthetic component that's worth thousands and thousands of dollars and still has a lot of good mileage left in it? Can we kind of figure that out? I think it'd be a lot easier than spending millions on brand new componentry. I don't know. Crazy way of thinking. Tom says this might be crazy, but you're in the right place then, Tom. But how about on techniques on how to roll around properly while lying down? Because I find it really hard to do so when I'm not wearing my prosthetic leg, especially when I'm in bed. Yeah, and this is something. It falls under the realm of functional mobility. All right. So when you hear a therapist talking about functional mobility, we're talking about things like bed mobility, being able to roll in your bed, being able to bridge in your bed, scooting to the edge of the bed, these little things that you probably took for granted before your amputation, right? Sitting up in bed, sit to stand, transferring to a chair. So this falls under the realm of gross functional mobility. And in your early days in the hospital after your amputation, this is what your therapy was focused on, or hopefully your therapist was focusing on this part of your mobility. And there certainly are techniques. So that's a really great idea, Tom. I like that. Thank you. There we go. Marty, thank you so much for putting that up there. So Penta Prosthetics, not Penta Recycling. My bad. Pentaprosthetics.org. Okay. So again, guys, I have not personally worked with them. I've only heard about them through their reputation. I've heard good things about them. So if any of you happen to donate prosthetic components to them, I would love to have your feedback and see, what was your experience with that? Thank you, Sean. You're very, very kind. Very kind. Let's see. Okay. Let's go back to our next question. Emily says, can you explain the difference between a pressure sore and an ulcer? This is a very good question. Very good question. So you guys will often hear me use these terms on the show, especially if we're discussing skin issues. A pressure sore is basically when a pressure is applied to an area of the skin and that results in skin breakdown, meaning that the skin is somehow compromised. An ulcer is basically a pressure sore that has ulcerated, that has opened up, okay? And you can have a grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, or grade 4 ulcer, and it's graded upon the depth of the ulcer. So grade 1 ulcer is basically a blister. So you have an abrasion there that the skin, the upper layers of the epidermis, the top layers of your skin have broken open. So officially that would be considered an ulcer. In colloquial terms, a lot of times when we think of ulcers, we think of these like big gaping wounds, but technically, a little blister is considered an ulceration. Right? Grade 1 ulcer. And then all the way down through the epidermis, the dermis, the layers of fat and subcutaneous tissue, and then down to muscle and bone. So that would be the deepest ulcer, and that would be a grade 4 ulcer. So it's mainly about, how do we describe the wound? And that's essentially what we're doing. Pressure sores take 20 minutes to form. When I worked back in the days of working in the spinal cord injury unit, this was a very, very big point of patient and family education. So because a quadriplegic and a paraplegic is not able to move themselves, and when they're sitting in bed, lying in bed, or sitting in a wheelchair, wherever their body weight is being put through, that is a potential pressure sore point. So when a person, for example, is sitting in a wheelchair, okay, their sits bones, their ischial tuberosity, otherwise known as their sit bones, right? So where the weight goes, okay? Come here, Bob, you're going to show off your ischial tuberosity. Do we have your consent? All right, good. All right, so basically we got Bob's little tushy bones right here, his ischial tuberosity, so that when a person sits in a wheelchair, that's where the weight of your body goes, okay? So even for people who have a large derriere, there is still that bone pushing through that soft tissue. And if the person does not move and just sits there for 20 minutes, they will have a red spot, and that would be considered a pressure sore. Okay. And obviously, if it's longer than 20 minutes, then you have the risk of it actually opening up and turning into an ulceration. Okay. So whenever we had our quadriplegics and paraplegics, we would teach them how to relieve pressure in their wheelchair, either on their own, teaching them how to do that on their own, or having them tell others how to do it for them. And every 20 minutes by the clock, they have to change and shift their weight. So if you've ever noticed in public, for example, if you've ever observed someone who is wheelchair bound, someone who has a spinal cord injury, you'll notice that they're almost fidgety, right? That's how you can, some people will describe it as they look like they're fidgeting. That's what they're doing, is they're shifting their weight constantly to allow the circulation to return to that area. Okay. And that's just one of the areas. Any place where you have a bony prominence, there is a potential for a pressure sore. Okay. So when a person is laying in bed, we have the butt bone. So right on the back of that sacrum, the tailbone, the butt bone, whatever you want to call it, right there is a big point for potential ulcering. The sides of the knees, the sides of the hips, okay? Even the shoulder blades for a person who is laying on their back for a long period of time. I've seen people get some gnarly ulcers on their shoulder blades because they've got that bone sitting right there. So how does it relate to an amputation? Well, with an amputation, obviously we need to be very careful with the skin and making sure that we don't have any pressure sores forming that will then lead to an ulceration. And then those of you who use a wheelchair for your primary source of mobility, you also need to be conscious of switching your weight constantly to make sure that you're not creating a pressure sore. So Bill asks, what type of sore is called from pistoning in your liner? So if you're talking about like at the end of the residual limb where it looks like a red hickey, okay, it's still called a pressure sore. I mean, I will describe it to my prosthetist as they've got that residual limb hickey, right? Because that's what it looks like. It looks like a hickey, and from the pistoning motion, right? But it's a pressure sore. It would be a grade 1, especially if there's no, if it hasn't opened and the skin has not ulcerated yet, okay? Now, the thing with some of these pressure sores, and this is something I also worked in spinal cord injury, and I worked many years in wound care. When you see someone who has a big, widespread pressure sore, okay, you're going to be a little concerned because even if the skin is not broken on the outside, underneath in those soft tissues, you might have some trouble brewing, okay, in the form of an abscess, in the form of tunneling. Okay, so again, and especially if you're not necessarily so much in the pistoning of a residual limb, that leads to other issues. Okay. But in general with pressure sores. Now, when it comes to the pistoning, so basically if the person is pistoning, pumping in and out of their socket as they're walking, which is what we don't want to happen, they can develop that at the end of their residual limb, like a suction cup hickey redness. And if it goes unchecked for a long period of time, then that end of the residual limb becomes very hard. Right? It almost becomes callus-like, very hard. And it's basically because all that liquid and edema is just sitting at the end. And if it's really left unchecked, and we're talking like months to years, it can lead to something called verrucous hyperplasia. And that's pretty gnarly thing. I've only seen 1 or 2 cases in my entire career. And it looks like a collection of like warts and plaques at the bottom of the residual limb. So skin's kind of important. Skincare is kind of important. Marty says, big issue in the OR, heels and sacral area. Oh my gosh, yes. I felt like when I worked in the acute care, I worked in trauma and level 1 trauma and the ICU units where you had people who were in bed for so long. My first assessment with my patient, I would always be like, all right, checking the heels, checking the bum, checking like I said, the shoulders, the tip of the shoulder blade. Right here, right there, especially if someone who's very, very slim, you'll see ulcerations forming there. Anywhere where there's prolonged pressure can potentially cause a pressure sore. Let's see. Trisha says, you mentioned a group you've worked with for donating prosthetic components other than Penta. Yes. So Trisha, that's Range of Motion Project, otherwise known as ROMP. If you go to their website, and again, if somebody could look that up, that would be lovely. I would appreciate that. Range of Motion Project. And then the acronym is ROMP. Okay, I know that on their website, they have a tab for donating prosthetic devices. And I don't know if they have you fill out a form and then they send you, a shipping label so that you can send it in. Emily says, how do you heal a tunnel? Ooh, yeah, we're digging into my wound care days, which I love. I loved working wound care. So basically, it's for those of you who are not familiar with that term, a tunnel. It's a wound can be described as tunneling. So sometimes you might see a wound on a patient, right? And you're looking at it, and the skin is intact, right? And they may just have a tiny little circle that just doesn't look anything bigger than a pencil eraser. And you just think, okay, that's not so bad. But then if you're the wound care therapist or the wound care nurse, you'll take one of those long sterile Q-tips and then you'll stick it into that hole and see how deep it goes. And guys, I've seen some pretty dramatic Q-tips being inserted into some very deep tunneling. Okay. And it usually indicates, okay, this wound is very, very deep. And then the danger with that is the deeper it goes, the more it can just kind of harbor and hold on to infection, and it won't allow the wound to heal. And then if it really goes unchecked, all of that is going to spread and it's just going to open up from the inside out. And you can get some monster wounds, monster wounds. I've dealt with some pretty big ones. So the question is, how do you fix that? Right. So usually if you find that there is tunneling in a wound, you need to determine how deep it goes. Okay. And usually there'll be a culture of some sort. We want to culture, see if there's any infection going on in there. The doctor will prescribe whatever ointments or whatever treatment. And the trick is that you have to pack the wound all the way. Okay. So you have to pack the wound all the way, get to the deep end of it, put the packing in there, whether it's medicated or whatever they have in there. And then every day or depending on the wound, again, some people might need wound care dressings done once a day, twice a day, every other day, depending on the patient. Then you have to unpack the entire wound, right? Do whatever cleaning or wound dressing needs to be done, and then repack the whole thing. And the goal is when you pack the wound, you cannot have an air pocket in there. You want to have that wound completely packed and covered so that it can start healing from the inside out. In other cases of tunneling, it just depends on the size, the location, if there's anything going on in the tissue around it. So if the rest of the tissue around it is starting to get infected and have gangrene or whatever going on, the surgeon might opt to open that wound, and to open it basically to excise all the dead tissue, right? And give it a good clean start. Yeah. Lots of years in wound care. Emily says, and once you get a wound, it's so easy for it to come back even after it's healed because the skin is compromised. Yes. And guys, if you haven't seen my videos with Click Medical, I'm kind of proud of these videos. My team and I worked quite a bit of time on these videos. It's a series of 3 videos where I explain the healing process. Okay. And the healing process, it's the same, no matter if you're healing from a bone injury, if you're healing from amputation, if you're healing from an ulcer, your body reacts the same way. It first has the inflammatory phase, the proliferative phase, and then the remodeling phase. Okay. And in those videos, I explain in detail. And guys, if you go to my Instagram or my Facebook postings, there's a post where I describe to you, hey, I put these videos out, comment, I think it's volume, and then I send you the links to the videos. They're good videos, and I go into detail in talking about them. But basically, Emily, a lot of times what happens is in the remodeling phase, the last phase of healing, okay, the wound is completely closed, all right? And a lot of the tissues have remodeled, they've healed, okay, but they're still sensitive, right? Especially in the skin, and especially if it's in a pressure point area. So yeah, even after a person's ulcer has healed, it can take several months and sometimes up to a year or more for that to really be strong. Okay. And then depending on the nature of the injury. So for example, when I worked in burn trauma and we had these folks with very extensive 3rd-degree burns and grafting, for the rest of their lives, that grafting is always going to be sensitive skin, and it's always going to be prone to breaking down and blistering up. So that's something that we have to educate patients on how to take care of their skin. Bill says, I was in a coma for 75 days. Oh boy. So I know that they were doing a lot of pressure sore prevention on you, Bill, for sure. Wound vac, sometimes, Marty. So I love wound vacs. I actually this is how old oh gosh, I'm going to age myself right now. When I was doing my spinal cord injury and wound care internship in Baylor over in Dallas, Texas, the wound vac had just come out. So I was so excited because as a student, I got to learn alongside the PTs on how to use a wound vac. And I got the chance to actually practice and use it on some of my patients. Wound vacs are wonderful tools, wonderful tools. May not necessarily be for deep tunneling, may not necessarily be appropriate for deep tunneling. Okay. And again, a lot of it depends on the wound itself, what it looks like. If it's like a super narrow tunnel, like what I call it, like a Q-tip size tunnel, it'll be very difficult to get the wound vac sponge in there properly to really pack it in. It's a lot easier to take gauze and slowly pack it in with the Q-tip and push it in that way. So Earl says, bad memories, yikes. See, Richard says the most effective way I have used for grade 1 through 3 has been Medi-Honey covered with hydrocolloid dressing. Yep. This allows for quick wound healing and just make sure you take care of it. Yeah. And again, Medi-Honey is something that came out after, it's been a few years since I've practiced wound care. It's something I loved doing. I loved debriding wounds. I loved taking care of wounds. But when I opened up my practice, I do minimal wound care at this point. So I haven't had the chance to use Medi-Honey, but I certainly love the benefits of using a really solid grade Medi-Honey. I think it's a fantastic tool to use, fantastic dressing. Jerry Ann says, I have a hole the size of a pinhole on my stump and it hasn't healed for almost 1.5 years. I'm wondering if there's a stitch in it. Yeah. Chances are there is something in there that is irritating it. And Jerry Ann, I would definitely, it would be worth getting that checked out for sure. To get that checked out. It could be that they may need to do like just a simple diagnostic ultrasound or maybe even an x-ray to see if there's something in there that hasn't dissolved and to maybe excise that stitch out of there. But definitely I would get that checked out. Yeah. Earl says, my AKA revision, they left the end of my stump open and had wound vac therapy for 4 months. And I have pictures. Yeah. It's like I said, wound vac is like, it's dramatic. It's really dramatic. I had, like I said, the first patient when wound vacs first came out and I was in that internship, it was this woman and I will never forget this woman. It was such a tragic story. She was the victim of a stabbing multiple times by one of her family members. And she had the wounds that we were taking care of, obviously a lot of defensive wounds on her arms, but a very large abdominal wound. Basically her abdomen was it was open and it was open down almost to the muscle. So we had to clean that wound and get it nice and clean. And then we put the wound vac on it. And it was incredible to see that shrink down like that. It was pretty incredible. Let's see. Yeah, Medi-Honey is awesome. I know. I even though I don't do wound care anymore, I still like to kind of keep up every once in a while and see what everybody's using. Richard says, before using over-the-counter methods, discuss it with your processor. Yes, healthcare professional. I've seen so many prosthetic patients send themselves down to bound around their choices. Richard, it's like you're my spirit animal. Richard, are you a physical therapist? What flavor? Tell me who you are, because I only see a picture that's this big, so it's hard for me to see who you are. And yeah, guys, I think one of the things that you will see me turn into like a rabid Cuban lady is when I'm reading on Facebook in the support groups and people are posting pictures of their wounds and they're asking, what should I do? Drives me bonkers. Bonkers. Okay. I have seen some wounds that are just horrific on Facebook and people asking each other, what should they do? Okay, guys, open wounds are not a Dr. Google search. That is a wound care center referral. Okay, so even though we know about the benefits of Medi-Honey, even though we know the benefits of some of these over-the-counter dressings, just because they're available over the counter does not mean that we should just put them on our wounds. Okay, there's so many different types of wounds. There are so many different things that may cause the wounds. Your medical condition and your medical history also play a role in how your wound care might be progressing. Okay, there's different types of wounds. You have venous ulcers, you have arterial ulcers, right? You have black eschar, yellow eschar, all different types of tissue that can be forming on the wound. Knowing how to assess a wound is something that needs to be done by a professional. Okay, and guys, I've even gone as far sometimes that when I have someone who presents with a wound, I may not necessarily send them back to their primary care doctor. Why? Because a lot of primary care doctors, they don't have a really deep knowledge of how to treat complicated wounds, right? And I've seen some horror stories with that where they were sent home with like backcitracin. Okay. So when it comes to somebody who has anything bigger than a blister or grade 1 pressure ulcer, I will refer them to a wound care center. And thankfully, in most major cities and towns, you will have a dedicated wound care center. And there you're going to have someone who's a doctor that specializes in wound care. You're going to have lots of wonderfully skilled nurses. And sometimes, depending on the state, you might even have a physical therapist who's doing the wound care. Okay. But yeah, if you want to see me go absolutely insane and start yelling at my computer screen, it's when I see people posting pictures of their wounds online and everybody else saying, oh, try this, try that, try that. No, get it taken care of the right way. That's my like cozy soapbox for the tonight. Let's see. And guys, I would also encourage you, if you see this on Facebook, encouraging people, guys, go see the doctor. Or a lot of people don't know that wound care centers exist. Many people are not aware of that, to get a referral to one of those places. Richard says, my neighbor who has a degree in O&P and worked at CHOP and Phil. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Actually, my cousin did his residency over at CHOP. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Richard. I appreciate you being on. Let's see. Marianne says, I had wound vacs on all 3 of my amputations, and it's not an easy heal. No, I mean, wound vacs are incredible, but it still takes time. And the fact that you have a wound vac, it means that your wound was pretty deep. Bill is asking, what is a wet to dry wound dressing? Y'all are making me like really like dust all that good stuff off today. So wet to dry is a type of dressing where you put the gauze or whatever dressing and it's wet. Usually it's wet in saline material, just in saline, sterile saline. And then it's applied to the wound. And then the wound is covered and then it is allowed to dry completely. Okay. So when the dressing is then taken off, it takes off some of the bad tissue. And that sounds a bit caveman-like, but it was a pretty effective method that we used. And I'm pretty sure we still use it again today. So if you have someone who has a wound and there's a lot of eschar, so eschar is just the fancy word for scab, right? And it has like a lot of either yellow eschar, that yellow gooky stuff, or the black eschar that gets really gnarly and gross and it's just sitting on the wound and it's just hard and it prevents the wound from being able to close in and heal. Okay. So one of the methods that wound care practitioners will do is they will put a wet dressing so that it will stick to that yucky tissue. And then once it dries, then as they remove the dressing, it'll remove some of that dead tissue. You have to be very careful with that because obviously if you're removing dead tissue like that, you're also pulling at the good tissue underneath. Okay. So again, don't try this at home, kids. Like this is something that you let the wound care person do it for you. And they also have to determine if that is an appropriate technique for your particular type of wound. Marty, absolutely right. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yes, sir. And guys, I won't lie. Sometimes when I walk through Walgreens or, whatever the pharmacy drugstore is, and I walk by, some of the stuff that's available over the counter, and it makes me cringe. It really does. Because these are items that did not used to be available over the counter 20 years ago when I first started working. And I don't think that they should be available over the counter. Yeah, but that's again, a whole nother soapbox. Emily says, not trying to be rude, but there's some things I just don't need to see. No, guys, we're not going to be posting any wound pictures on the show because it's a pretty intense picture and not everybody has the stomach for it. And I totally understand that. Let's see. Charlie says, I had wound care come out to my house. Yeah. So yeah, it's something. Wait. Sorry, my computer is doing really weird things right now. Got Robin on board. Okay. All right. So let's see. Emily says our in-person amputee support group has discussed wound care tonight. Okay, well there you go. Yeah, and I think it's important to learn. You don't need to see the pictures, not necessary, but it's good to know. Especially those of you who have underlying medical issues, vascular issues, diabetic issues, blood pressure issues, autoimmune, kidney, cardiac disease, where your circulation is going to be compromised because of your medical condition and your medical history. So it's good to understand have a general understanding of wounds. Okay. And also to know what to do in the event that you do have any kind of a pressure ulcer forming. Where do you go to? And who do you go to? Okay. Earl asks, not sure where to post the foot for the giveaway. Okay. I'm interested in anything you've heard about the Rush foot. As it requires no foot shell. I know you're partnered with College Park, amazing company, but not having no foot shell, not requiring a shoe interests me as it feels like the foot slides into the shoe. Okay, so I believe Rush is made currently by Proteer. And they also have a wonderful foot line as well. They inherited some of the feet from Freedom Innovations. I don't know if you guys remember Freedom Innovations. That was a foot company and a knee company that they got bought out a few years back, and then they had to basically split out their products. So I think it was between two. I think Ottobock took some of their products, and I think Proteer. Anyways, so they inherited some of their products. So Proteer, I believe they were the original makers of the Rush foot. I don't have as many people with Rush feet. I know that when Rush foot came out, it came out with quite the fanfare. There was a lot of push for that particular foot. I don't know as much about it. It is, from what I remember, it was meant for the active, so like very K3, K4 users. It's made of like a glass composite, so not carbon fiber. So it was meant to be very durable, waterproof. It was supposed to be good for over different terrain. One of the knocks on it was that it was a little bit heavier and it may feel a little less springy than the carbon fiber. So again, when it comes to whether I like one foot over the other, and this includes even College Park feet, I'm more interested in comparing across the board on the same classification level. Okay. So one of the things I might find it comparable to would be like the soleus in the College Park foot. Okay. Or perhaps something like maybe the Oser Proflex foot. It'd be good to kind of compare across the board for those type of feet. So that's kind of how I would approach it. Let's see. Emily says, I had a pressure sore on my bottom, went to PM&R, and he told me to use diaper cream, went to wound care, and was having surgery on the wound next week. Whoops. And that kind of surprises me, Emily, because of doctors in general, PM&R docs tend to have a pretty good understanding of wound care because they work, in inpatient rehab centers where some folks can have some they might present with wounds. I find infectious disease doctors, that was actually the first wound care team that I worked with over at Jackson Memorial Hospital. It was the infectious disease doctor who headed that wound care team. General surgeons, they deal a lot with wounds, and usually it was because it becomes a surgical wound. But yeah, it's I've heard a lot of stories like that, I'm sorry to say. And guys, even with all of the years of experience that I have had with wound care and skin management, there are some things that I will look at a person's skin and say, I don't know what I'm looking at, and we need to refer you out as quick as we can to the right person. So it really is about understanding your scope of practice when you're a clinician. This goes for prosthetists as well. I've seen, unfortunately, some patients come in with grade 2 ulcers, so pretty kind of getting a little deeper there with those ulcers, and the prosthetist cast them for their socket right over the ulcer and didn't say anything about the ulcer, didn't think to make a reference or referral. And that occasionally happens as well. So again, it's understanding your scope of practice, meaning what is it that you understand and know, and then understanding what you don't know and knowing who to refer to in those cases. All right. Bill says, my prosthetist said that the hydraulic feet are not recommended here in Arizona because the rubber bumper dries out. Okay. And he said they're quite a bit heavier. I'm still going to try it. Okay. I can totally see where the weather might be an issue with the bumpers with regards to the weight. And this is something, and again, if Richard, if you're still on board, I'd love to hear your opinion on this as a prosthetist. Okay. When it comes to the weight of a prosthetic foot, a prosthetic knee, okay, if the socket is done well and the suspension system is on point, then the prosthesis is not going to feel heavy. Okay. And guys, the Odyssey IQ, which is the microprocessor hydraulic foot, it is very sleek. I mean, I'm impressed. I'm very impressed with College Park Engineering there. Very sleek, very low profile. It's lighter by 300 grams from the next heaviest hydraulic microprocessor foot. Okay. There are other microprocessor feet out there in the market. For example, the Elan from Blatchford. Okay. That one's been out for quite a few years. It's a heavy foot. And you can just see by looking at it, it's got some heft to it, right? They've trimmed it down over the years, but it still is heavier because of the componentry. But I've had so many people that are different sizes, different abilities, that they love the foot. So again, if it is suspended correctly and your socket is fitting well, and I think, Bill, I think you got the right attitude for it. And especially when, guys, keeping in mind, so many of these companies, College Park included, they offer free trial programs. Okay. So again, Bill, a question to ask your prosthetist, and this is not to be combative with them, but just to say, I would still like to try it. And with regards to the rubber bumper drying out, which completely understandable. Okay. What is the College Park policy on replacing those bumpers? I don't know the answer myself, but asking your prosthetist, well, if it's a matter of replacing the bumpers on a maintenance level, what does that look like? Is that a feasible situation? Because if it's a question of maintenance issues, guys, don't let that stop you from potentially using a foot that could be really, really great for your life. That's kind of how I see it. All right, guys. So Emily says, my infectious disease doctor was awesome the 2 times I had osteomyelitis. Yeah, the infection, because that's what they do, infection. All right, guys. I am going to ask, this is my ask for the evening, guys. I am trying to grow my texting service because I find that it is very easy for me to communicate with you all with this texting. And I love getting your text messages in return with any questions that you may have. So guys, if you have not already subscribed to my texting service, I am humbly asking if you could please consider doing so. You would text COSI Talks, all caps, one word, to that number that I just posted right there. I don't spam. I don't abuse your goodwill by sending you a bunch of junk, and I don't sell your phones to anybody or anything like that. And again, it's also a way for you to communicate back with me and sending me your questions. So if you haven't already done so, I would ask that you consider to do it. All right, guys, with that being said, I am done. I am done for this evening. We have had a lot of wonderful questions on the show. Check out the cheat sheets. Keep your eyes open on my Instagram and Facebook, guys, because I think I'll start having to crank out some more of these cheat sheets for you. So as always, thank you for letting me be a part of your lives this evening. And I will see you guys next week, same bad time.